I call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, April 10, 2025. All managers are present. Is there anyone here who wanted to speak to the board about a matter that's not on the agenda? Seeing no hands. The next item then is approval of the agenda with one change. I will take up item 12.1 at the end of the agenda. But with that, is there a motion to approve the agenda? Thank you, Manager Miller. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Olson seconds. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? On the consent agenda, we have approval of the minutes of the March 27 board meeting. We have approval of two resolutions. 25022 is authorization to submit the annual activity report to the Board of Water and Soil Resources and the Department of Natural Resources. And Resolution 25023 is authorization to renew the GIS and whiskey maintenance and license agreements. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Hijmati? Pardon?
That was
Which one?
the one where just seconded.
I'm sorry, what do you want a discussion on
I just want to make a comment on this.
before I vote?
Yes.
All right.
Okay. As we went through the two items that are on consent tonight, I just wanted to compliment the staff for a great report that they're submitting to Bowser. It is not only well done with the way it's presented, laid out in the facts, but also in from everything from photography to the way we communicate the story. So that was an exceptional report that we're submitting. It is an annual report, I understand that, but I just want to say thank you to the team.
Thank you, Manager Olson. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Manager Sando and Manager Olson and I attended the community meeting for the County Road 6 pond retrofit. And it was really, really well attended, and we had some city council members, we had CAC members, we had Long Lake Waters, and lots of community people there. Did either of you want to say anything about that?
I was just wanted to thank the staff that was there and the presentation they made. Also, it was very interesting. People were there not to complain, but just to get information, what's going on in their neighborhood. They're all for clean water, so it was very, very rewarding.
Thank you.
Good questions.
Manager Loftus, could we get a report from Operations and Programs Committee?
Yes. Earlier this evening, we had a presentation, and it was regarding cart management. The district has been involved for over a decade in looking at cart management for 6 Mile Creek, Halsted Bay, and worked with many different organizations, implemented projects, and right now, the research and monitoring staff has starting to wrap up a statewide CARP effectiveness assessment that they're working on with the U of M, and they gave us a full update on that, facilitated a great discussion, and forthcoming will be a technical report concluding, or with those findings, and then some engagement, kind of a one-pager of what they learned and how we might apply that going forward. So another step in a long series of looking at carp and how we manage them in the watershed.
Thank you. Are there any other meetings or events managers would like to report on? Then our upcoming meeting and event schedule is printed. In addition to our regular committee and board meetings, there is the Minnesota Metro Watersheds quarterly meeting. Manager Olson will attend. And the Three Rivers Park District State of the Parks meeting, I think a number of managers will be attending that. We'll move now to item 10.1, which is permit 24525, Ms. Sanis presenting. And while she's getting ready, let me just say that we'll first take a staff presentation, then I'll let any public members who want to speak come forward, and then the board will consider. And if you do come forward, please give your name and your address. and then begin your comments. Remembering that you may, talk about any aspect of these projects, but the only thing before us will be the permits. Ms. Sanas.
Thank you, President White, Board of Managers. Tonight, I will be briefing you on permit 24-525 for a driveway and utility installation project at 26275 Smithtown Road in Shorewood. The proposed driveway and utilities would cross Pebble Creek, an intermittent stream on site. This project triggers the district's erosion control, water body crossings and structures, and floodplain alteration rules. This permit is being brought before the board for consideration due to requests from 2 nearby property owners with concerns primarily surrounding the impact on the local ecosystem, the Pebble Creek, and effects on groundwater. Some of these members of the public may be here tonight and may wish to speak. Staff and the district engineer have reviewed this permit and found it to be compliant with all district rule requirements and therefore recommend the permit be approved with the conditions listed in the permit report. I'll start off the presentation with the project background, followed by a walkthrough of the district's rural analysis. I'll then outline the comments and concerns received during the public notice period, followed by time for questions or comments facilitated by the board. The applicant is proposing the project in the city of Shorewood, located in the Lake Minnetonka subwatershed, as shown here in yellow. Zooming in a bit further, you can see the project location, again shown in yellow, drains northwest via Pebble Creek into a wetland complex before ultimately draining into Lake Minnetonka. The site is shown here, outlined in orange, with Pebble Creek shown in blue. The site has 1 existing home on it, and the city of Shorewood approved a 2-lot split for the site in October of 2024, so the site is now divided into 2 parcels, as shown here. And the proposed work is occurring on the highlighted orange parcel. Here you can see a photo of Pebble Creek, the intermittent stream on site, taken last fall. And here's another photo of the creek taken at a site visit in this March. The current project that is proposed is the installation of a driveway and utilities such as water, sanitary sewer, phone, cable, gas, and electric lines. These are proposed to be built to service a future single-family home that is not proposed at this time and will be subject to future permitting. In order to construct the driveway crossing, a series of culverts are proposed at the point where the driveway crosses Pebble Creek. Even though the future home isn't proposed at this time, grading is proposed in the area to prepare the site for the future build. Because this is a 1 to 2 lot subdivision and the proposed impervious surface amount for the driveway and future single-family home is under 1 acre of new and reconstructed impervious surface, the stormwater management rule is not applicable. That being said, the applicant is proposing a filtration basin to conform to the city's stormwater regulations, which will be constructed at the time of the future house. I'll now pivot to the analysis for how the proposed project meets district rule requirements. Because the project disturbs more than 5,000 square feet of land and will be moving more than 50 cubic yards of soil, the erosion control rule is triggered. The applicant's erosion control plan proposes a construction entrance at the north side of the site, outlined here in green, with perimeter control around the entire site and between the proposed grading and the creek. The applicant also proposes a temporary ditch check downstream of the proposed culvert to reduce sedimentation downstream. Staff have reviewed the applicant's erosion control plan and has found it to be compliant with all rule requirements. This project triggers the water body crossings and structure rule for 2 parts of the project. The first is the proposed culverts associated with the driveway crossing, and also the subsurface crossing of the creek for the utility lines. The rule states that the use of the better bank of a water body must meet a demonstrated specific need. In this case, the demonstrated need is to provide vehicular and utility access to the proposed house. I'll first go over the analysis for the proposed culverts and then the utility crossing. The rule requires that hydraulic capacity be maintained, and for watercourses specifically, there may be no increase in upstream or downstream flood stage. The district engineer has reviewed the applicant's modeling for the proposed culverts and found that there's no increase in flood stage, therefore meeting this section of the rule. The project is also required to maintain navigational capacity. As shown earlier, Pebble Creek is an intermittent stream with low flows that are not capable of navigation in neither the existing nor the proposed conditions. The project must also preserve aquatic and upland wildlife passage. The proposed culverts are 2 feet wide, and their size and elevation maintain passage of wildlife that would be within the creek. The proposed driveway will also not prohibit passage of deer or any other wildlife that would cross in the area. The flows passing through the creek are relatively low, but the applicant also proposes riprap at the outfall of the culverts to prevent erosion or scour. The rule requires that the proposal be the minimal impact solution to the project's need. The applicant has also provided 4 alternatives demonstrating that their proposal is the minimal impact solution. In this case, the only road access is off of Smithtown Road to the north there, and the lot size is too narrow to build a home on the northern side of the parcel, so therefore it's necessary to cross the creek to access the parcel's buildable area. The proposal was found to be the minimal impact solution because the number and size of culverts was enough to ensure that there was no increase in flood stage. However, some other alternatives that were considered were larger crossings like a bridge, box culvert, or larger arch pipes, but those have more inherent impact being larger crossings and affect other factors like constructability. Now pivoting to the analysis of the proposed utility lines, the proposed lines cross below Pebble Creek and therefore were analyzed using the subsurface crossing criteria. This criteria requires that the crossings have a minimum clearance of 3 feet below the bed of the water body and that entry and exit boreholes be placed at least 100 feet away from the water body bank. The water and sanitary sewer is proposed to be constructed with the driveway installation and meet this criteria. The additional utilities will be installed at the same time as the future home construction so that they can tie into the service site. Therefore, it's recommended that a condition of the permit be to provide updated crossing plans if plans do change due to final home layout. The installation of the culverts requires fill within the floodplain of Pebble Creek, and therefore the floodplain alteration rule is applicable. The project proposes 13.36 cubic yards of floodplain fill and 15.51 cubic yards of excavation to offset the proposed fill. This results in 2.15 cubic yards of net floodplain storage created, therefore meeting the rule. Now that we've gone over the district's rule analysis that are triggered for this proposal, I'll discuss the comments and concerns that were received during the permit's public notice period by 2 nearby property owners. After receiving the comments, district staff met with one of the property owners and Shorewood city engineer to meet on site to discuss the concerns in a bit more detail. Nearby property owners expressed concern that district policies are to protect wetlands. However, this project isn't being reviewed for wetland impacts. As mentioned earlier, the site drains to a wetland complex before eventually draining to Lake Minnetonka. However, there are no delineated wetlands identified on site, and therefore the wetland protection rule is not applicable. That being said, staff has reviewed the project under the erosion control rule to make sure that best management practices are in place to minimize sedimentation off-site and into downstream water bodies. Concern was also raised in regard to the impact that the project will have on the bed and bank of Pebble Creek. The installation of the culverts results in some inherent level of disturbance, but the project has been reviewed under the minimal impact analysis for the water body crossings and structures rule. Prohibiting the crossing would mean prohibiting access to the buildable portion of the parcel. The applicant also proposes a temporary ditch check to minimize sedimentation and erosion control blankets and seed mix on the disturbed banks of the channel. There was also concern raised regarding the impact that the construction will have on wildlife habitat. And while the general project and construction is not regulated by the district on the impact it will have on wildlife, the impact that the proposed crossing will have on wildlife passage was reviewed under the water body crossings and structures rule. Concerns regarding tree removal were also raised. While the district does not regulate tree removal, the city of Shorewood has a tree ordinance with a replacement requirement that staff understands will be implemented as a part of the city building permit process. A concern was also raised regarding the proposed grading and increased impervious surface and that it should be regulated. As mentioned earlier, because the new and reconstructed impervious surface for the driveway and future home is less than 1 acre of new and reconstructed impervious surface, and also part of a single-family residential development, it's exempt from the stormwater management rule. However, the applicant is proposing a filtration basin to capture and treat the runoff from the home in accordance with city stormwater regulations. A central concern of nearby property owners was that the proposed driveway and future home may increase groundwater levels. They have requested that a requirement of the permit be for the applicant to conduct a hydrologic assessment looking at the project's potential impact to groundwater in greater detail. While the district does not regulate groundwater impacts, because the concern was raised, we have discussed this with the district engineer. Staff and the district engineer have evaluated the project in its terms of scope, scale, and position in the landscape at a very high level. While understanding that there are reports of high groundwater in the area, there weren't any unique features of the type of project, which is a driveway crossing and single-family home, or unique features within the landscape that would suggest that the project would materially change groundwater levels. On a more local level, one way that larger scale projects could impact groundwater is by impounding water and holding it back, that it has to be pushed down into the water table. The district engineer has reviewed the proposed project and has found that that's not the case here. The proposed crossing does not impound flow, and it's designed to mimic existing flow conditions. Another piece that would be looked at for projects of a larger scale is what the runoff is and how that runoff is being managed. In this case, while the project does increase hardcover, all runoff is proposed to be routed to the filtration basin or Pebble Creek and is all ultimately moving downstream and away from any nearby homes. Therefore, by reviewing the project scope, location, and factors that may impact groundwater at a high level, it's not expected that the project would materially affect groundwater levels. Finally, another concern that was raised was regarding the nearby Smithtown Ponds project. I don't think my slide is coming up for that, but the Smithtown Ponds project is a project that was permitted by the district in 2021 and has since been constructed and is just east of the site. The project was proposed by the city of Shorewood to provide rate control and reduce flows in Pebble Creek and Freeman Park Channel during high flow events, and also to provide stormwater treatment to the local Strawberry Lane Road reconstruction project. The expressed concern was that the project was constructed incorrectly and is reducing flows to both channels for more than what was proposed. The city is currently in the process of preparing an as-built survey for the project, which the district will review to verify if the project was built according to district regulations. However, the district can only require that any applicable future action from the city if it's regarding district regulations. Not sure, I think my screen might have frozen, but no problem. Okay, that sounds good. And to summarize what I've presented tonight, the project proposes the installation of a driveway and utility crossing across Pebble Creek, triggering the district's erosion control, water body crossings and structures, and floodplain alteration rules. The permit is being brought before the board for consideration due to concerns that have been raised by nearby property owners, which district staff and engineer have reviewed and found to either be addressed or outside of district regulatory scope. Finally, staff and the district engineer have reviewed the project and found it to meet all rule requirements and therefore recommend approval of the permit. And thank you all. Thank you, President White and Board of Managers, for listening to this briefing on permit 24-525. I believe we do have members of the public here tonight who may wish to speak, but first, if you or the board have any questions or comments, I'm happy to address them now.
Thank you, Ms. Sanas. Does anyone wish to come forward and speak to this permit? Seeing no one, I'll ask for a motion to approve the permit.
Move approval.
Manager Miller moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Maxwell seconds. Any questions or discussion regarding the permit? Manager
Just a
Loftus?
quick question. The ponds that are just on the other side, are those the ones you can see from the trail?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Would there be setback? That's not a wetland though, so would there be setbacks from a pond?
Yes, thank you, Manager Loftus. That's a good question. All of the wetland impacts and setbacks for the Smithtown Ponds project was regulated as a part of that permit.
Yeah.
And for wetland buffers in general, if there is a wetland that's off of the property owner is not required to put a buffer around a different
I just wanted to note, we're test driving new AV systems, so we're working out the kinks, appreciating everybody's patience. So if we do have that freeze up again, I think Maggie will just continue the presentation. All right, so it's something that Murphy's Law, we test drove it 5 times today, didn't have any issues. But now it's prime time.
There's a gremlin maybe, huh? Okay, thank
Does
you.
that help? Okay. Okay.
Thank you for bringing it to our attention. Ms. Mendon.
All right. Good evening, President White and managers. I'm presenting permit 25-056 for a single-family home located at 9501 Lakewood Circle. The permit is before the board due to public request from a concerned neighbor. I believe members of the public are in attendance tonight and may wish to address the board. This permit application is also requesting an exception from our stormwater rule by proposing to get credit for treating 5.87 acres of ag land on the property. Staff and the district engineer are recommending that the board approve this permit and the associated exception. Quick outline, I'll start with a project overview before walking through the district's rule analysis. Then I'll go over the exception request and end with an overview of the concerns. 9501 Lakewood Circle is located within the 6 Mile Creek Halsted Bay subwatershed and is in Laketown Township. The 61-acre parcel shown in yellow is on the west side of Pearsons Lake and falls right on the district's boundary. The site has historically been used for agriculture, and the proposed use will incorporate both agriculture and a residential dwelling. In 2023, the applicant applied for a district permit for the construction of a driveway and pole barn, which you see on the screen. This project was reviewed and approved and recently finished construction. The permit we have in front of us tonight is for the construction of a single-family home in the area shown in yellow. The project will involve the construction of a new residential structure and associated driveway, which will result in additional 0.52 acres of hard cover. The project proposes to disturb just under 80,000 square feet and excavate over 5,000 cubic yards, so the erosion control rule is applicable. To meet the requirements, the applicant is proposing a construction entrance and perimeter control with a double row of silt fence between the proposed work and the wetland edge. Additional erosion practices are noted in the applicant's SWIP. On site, there's a managed to wetland. The house's proposed upgradient of this wetland and therefore requires a buffer. To meet this rule, the applicant has provided plans that show a 25-foot buffer using buffer averaging, and the buffer is shown in orange. The picture on the left is looking back on the property from the shoreline and shows the existing conditions and vegetation. The applicant is not proposing to grade or otherwise disturb the existing vegetation within the buffer area, aside from a 10 by 3 foot vegetated swale, which will be stabilized and vegetated in accordance with PCA guidance. This buffer area meets the requirements of this rule and will be recorded under a maintenance declaration. All work on this site is considered a common plan of development under our stormwater management rule, which means that we review for the total amount of hard cover on site, not just for the proposed house. So for both projects, the aggregate hard surface is 2.27 acres, which requires volume and rate control. Our rule requires that water quality standards be met by providing volume control. Under common plan, we look at rates in aggregate, so across the entire site, to determine if there's an overall increase in rates discharging off the site. The development as a whole does not increase peak runoff rates, which meets our rules. We also look at each individual discharge point. In this instance, modeling shows a 3 CFS increase in the peak runoff rate for the wetland, which then outlets to Pearsons Lake. This negligible increase is offset elsewhere on the site and has been reviewed by the district engineer, who has no concerns. For volume control, the development in total is required to provide 8,266 cubic yards of volume control for those 2.27 acres of new impervious surface. As part of phase 1 of this project, 4 basins were constructed, and those basins provide 13,323 cubic feet of volume control. For the house, it's been demonstrated that due to high groundwater and poor soils, a basin that captures and infiltrates the house runoff is technically infeasible. The applicant is requesting to utilize the existing basins, which are oversized and treat a greater area, to meet the water quality requirements, which brings us to the exception request. Under strict compliance, the applicant would provide 1,901 cubic feet of volume control to capture and treat runoff from the 0.52 acres of new impervious from the house. The amount of phosphorus removal provided by this amount of volume control would be 1.68 pounds per year. The applicant is requesting that the board consider the existing basins, which are oversized, treat a larger area, and capture ag land to meet water quality for the site. 3 of the 4 basins capture 14.1 pounds of phosphorus that would otherwise flow into Pearsons Lake. The 4th basin captures 7.8 pounds of total phosphorus per year that would otherwise drain to a low point on the parcel. So in total, the proposal removes more than 10 times the required amount of phosphorus within the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed, which leads staff and the district engineer to recommend approval of the proposed exception. In addition to that, the applicant has proposed vegetated swales along both sides of the driveway and on the eastern side of the house, which will filter runoff, and these swales are highlighted in green. Transitioning to the neighbors' concerns, during the permit public notice period, the district received inquiries from a neighbor, Mr. Klingelhutz, who is the president of the Pearsons Lake Association. As we commonly do when there's public interest in a permit, staff engaged with the neighbor and exchanged multiple emails and phone calls over the past few weeks. In the next few slides, I'll go over the concerns and the district's conclusions. I'll note that the applicant, Mr. Young, offered to have a meeting to discuss any of these concerns and relayed that to the concerned neighbors, but it was not something that was pursued. A concern that falls within the district's scope is that the construction limits are shown to overlap the proposed wetland buffer. On the screen, the dark line represents the construction limits and proposed double row of silt fence. I've circled the area of the wetland buffer that is within these construction limits. The question was asked, does the district routinely allow construction limits right up to the open water within wetland buffer areas on large properties? The answer is yes. The district regulates impacts to wetlands themselves and requires buffer areas to be vegetated. This allows for buffer disturbance as long as it's revegetated. In this case, the construction limits go into the wetland buffer because they're constructing that vegetated swale between a pipe outlet and the wetland, which will reduce sediment load into the wetland. The area will be fully established per PCA guidance and will not impact the overall function of the wetland. A concern was also raised regarding the project being split into different phases. As I covered, the district reviewed this as a common plan of development, meaning that we looked at all of the work on site to determine the scope of stormwater management. Other concerns were raised, but ultimately fall outside of the district's regulatory scope. At a high level, those concerns were centered around tree preservation, which the district does not regulate, invasive species review, which is not a requirement for this project, indigenous burial mounds, which was reviewed by Carver County back in 2023 and was found to not be a concern. And then lakeshore setbacks, which the district does not review for, but Carver County does. And from speaking with their staff, we understand that these setbacks are being met. A concern that has been raised is that a new tile and tile intake was installed and caused the circled wetland to drain faster than it did before the development. These concerns were initially raised in 2023, and agencies such as Carver County WMO, and Carver County SWCD reviewed historic aerials, went on site, and ultimately concluded that this wetland has been drained, altered, and tiled for decades. So staff have no reason to believe that there was any violation of the Wetland Conservation Act or that there were changes to drainage patterns. Also, this concern is not directly applicable to the permit for the single-family home. So bringing it back to the permit that is in front of us tonight, staff have reviewed and confirmed that the project is compliant with the district's erosion and wetland protection rules. The applicant is requesting an exception from the stormwater rule, which would result in over 10 times greater removal of total phosphorus per year. Staff and the district engineer recommend that the board approve the permit and associated exception. Before turning it back to the board, I'll note that the applicant, Mr. Young, is here tonight and is willing to answer any questions that you guys may have. And also members of the public may wish to address the board as well.
Thank you, Ms. Mendon. Anyone who wishes to speak should come forward to the microphone. Okay.
Mike Klingelhutz, 6945 Abbeywood Lane. It's a Chaska address, but it's in Laketown Township, and we also have a farm, 7940 Airport Road, Waconia mailing address. And I'd like to start out with, I knew the former landowner very well and was invited onto the property many times. And I'm a farmer, so I know and notice drainage patterns. Also a township supervisor during the little brouhaha over the neighbors' concern about flooding from the first phase of the project on his property. And I have included a letter from him in your packet, along with some other information related to drainage, but I would be against the exemption, and my reasons for that is the topography and the building plans by the lake are begging for a stormwater pond down there. The driveway to get down to the house curves down a steep hill, and the drainage from both ditches will be going down towards the lake. The water from stormwater drains between the house and the hill. I think there's 5 of them. Also is planned to be headed in a vegetative swale. And there's one more here. Well, water from the swimming pool. There's a proposed swimming pool, and I'm a little concerned about where that water will wind up when it's emptied, probably annually. And then I understand from Maggie's presentation that the soil down by the lake isn't suitable for a stormwater pond, but then I question how it could be suitable for building footings. That doesn't make much sense to me. Moving on, the encroachment on the existing wetland down by the lake is it's a 60-acre piece of property. So there's 2 wetlands on the property, and I kind of question why you have 60 acres, why you have to have the construction limits in the one small wetland buffer. Now, moving on to something else, and this relates to my having been on the property many times and knowing which way the drain tile drained. Basin 3 does not drain to Pearson Lake. It drains to Reeds Lake. The area that we're talking about where the driveway is right on the cusp of 2 watersheds, Minnehaha Creek, Pearson Lake that way, Reeds Lake. giving credit for Basin 3, phosphorus credit for it, it's very questionable. Actually, in my mind, it's not questionable, but these guys say it is valid. On the basin. So, yeah, I think the phosphorus, the phosphorus that's being precluded from going into Pearson Lake is overstated because of that. And another one of the basins took a long circuitous route to get to the south end of Pearson Lake and went through several wetlands. So I question the merits of the phosphorus reduction for those reasons. I said against the exemption, I think the area begs for a stormwater pond down by the lake to take care of the drainage from the driveway, from the 5 drains between the house and the hill, and the swimming pool. You know, these days, putting water into a vegetative swale, there's not a lot of homeowners who put up with wet spots. I think for long-term service to the lake, it would be best to have a stormwater pond down there. You know, there's landowners who want to do what they want, but then that might conflict with what's good for the lake. I'll end with that, and I'll yield to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Klingelhatz. Okay. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? I don't see any questions for you.
Mike forgot to mention that he was a former member of the Board of Managers.
Good to have him in the building.
Excuse me.
You forgot to mention you were a former member of the Board of Managers here.
Well, I've been around. I have some compassion for you guys. No, I enjoyed the people, learned a lot being on the watershed board. I did learn something at the very end. And this was when we were discussing replacing the administrator. Don't be the first person to say that the administrator isn't doing his job and that you don't want to rehabilitate him. That was me at the meeting when we were discussing the job performance of the previous administrator. It all worked out in the long run. We got James Whisker. Okay. I would like to compliment James and Maggie for their interaction with me on this. I don't agree with their outcome, though. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to the permit? Very well, then I'll look for a motion to approve the exception.
Aren't we doing 2 motions?
First the exception, then the permit? Yeah. So is there a motion to approve the exception?
Could you repeat the exception? Is that
Could you repeat the exception, Ms. Mendon?
The exception is that the applicant is requesting an exception from the stormwater rule for a proposal that would result in over 10 times greater removal of total phosphorus per year.
Thank you.
And his argument was that it wasn't going to take enough process out.
Do you want the motion for discussion and questions, Sherry? Is that?
I
what you're
do,
looking for?
yeah, I do want
I'll
a
do it
motion.
for that purpose. I'll
Okay, thank
make
you. Is there a
motion.
second for purpose of discussion? Manager Hashmati, thank you.
Okay, no.
On the phosphorus, it was his assumption that with taking out 10 wasn't enough. It wasn't, we couldn't get that much if we did it a different way.
Yeah, I believe that what Mr. Klingelhutz was referring to is that a portion of the site drains outside of our watershed. And so he's saying that that should not be accounted for.
Mr. Whisker?
I would just build, thank you, President White, managers, Mr. Klingelhutz and Maggie. I just build on what Maggie was saying. I think the way that Maggie had broken down the exception is it does acknowledge that Basin 3, as Mike pointed out, drains to a low spot. That's that agriculturally farmed, historically ditched and tiled wetland that's on site. And that actually has, I trust Mike, but according to the Carver SWCD, actually can drain both directions because it has 2 tile outlets. But it does drain outside, because this is right on the watershed break southwest towards Reeds Lake. That area is accounted for in the 7 pounds of load reduction, if I understand correctly. The remaining 3 basins provide 14 pounds of total load reduction, all of which does make its way to Pearson Lake, and that is contrasted against the required load reduction of 1.68 pounds. So that's why Maggie and staff and the district engineer's recommendation orbits around the approximately 10 times the amount that's required. So I don't know that, while the number 7 pounds was included for Basin 3, I don't know that it's factored into the board's consideration for the exception. And I did make notes of I almost called you Manager Klingelhutz. Mr. Klingelhutz's other questions, if you wanted to tick through those with staff.
So one question was having a stormwater pond by the lake. Could you address that?
Absolutely, President White. Given it's an exception, we don't prescribe a solution for someone to meet stormwater. The applicant wasn't interested in building a pond down there. Also, given the poor soils and high groundwater, it wouldn't be suitable for infiltration, so it would have to be double the size for filtration. And kind of with the low grade that's over there, it'd be pretty difficult to build. And ultimately, there are other options, but this is what the applicant has proposed.
Thank you. Also, Mr. Klingelhutz mentioned the wetland encroachment. And you said that would be restored.
Yep, so the area that is included within the construction limits of in the wetland buffer will be reestablished.
Mm-hmm. I don't think the question of the swimming pool water was raised in the materials we have. You were just worried about where they drain the chlorine? Can you explain why you were worried about the pool water draining?
Mhm.
Thank you. James, Mr. Whistler.
President White, managers, Mr. Klingelhutz, this is something that Mike brought up offline. I can't remember if we talked about it or provided a response in writing, but we did. The Watershed District doesn't regulate pool discharge, as you know, but the Pollution Control Agency provides guidelines and best practice. And the best practice is to cease chlorination 3 to 4 days before you discharge a swimming pool, and then to drain it directly onto the ground, which is specifically in PCA guidelines, the lawn. I'm not sure Mr. Young is here. If the board is interested, they could inquire further as to how that's going to be drained, but that is best practice guidelines from the state.
Thank you. Another concern was that about how steep the driveway was and how that would drain around next to the driveway.
Yeah, so they propose vegetated swales that go along both sides of the driveway, so that will kind of capture some of that runoff. And then, as the photo showed, it's vegetated with grass all the way until the lake, so that'll be captured and filtered there.
Thank you. What else did you find on your list, Mr. Whisker?
I believe you covered the
Oh, good, okay.
highlights.
Anything else from the board? Manager Loftus?
The utilization or the using the capacity of the existing basins and kind of having a phased approach to this. I wonder, how do we memorialize or record use of that capacity? And I recognize this is all one site right now, and I don't know the character of that neighborhood that well to know if it will always be a 60-acre site, but given kind of the phased actions so far and kind of utilizing a basin that's quite a bit away from the house and away from the lake, I don't know how or if we're recording or memorializing using up that capacity with this project that then makes it unavailable should they continue to develop the rest of the site. I just know sometimes those things get lost or unmaintained or not kept track of. So that just raises some questions for me, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. The stormwater basins and wetland buffers are recorded on the property in a maintenance declaration.
Okay.
And so that sticks with the property even if it's subdivided or sold. And then our permit files will have kind of all the information on, in phase one, they constructed these. This is the capacity. Phase two is accounting for some of that. So it'll all be papered out.
And you keep those permit files for
Forever. Yeah.
forever? Okay. And you have assignment of that capacity to certain parts of the project?
Yeah, that's part of the permit file.
Okay.
How many phases, do you understand, could exist?
Manager Olson, for this site, right now it's just 2.
Thank you.
I'm not aware of any other proposed phases, but those would be reviewed under that common plan.
Okay.
So they would require treatment for any impervious.
Mr. Whisker?
President White, thank you. Manager Loftus, just to build on your question there, I think Maggie answered it appropriately. The existing stormwater basins are recorded against the title of the property. And then in terms of the permit file, if the board wanted to, or we wanted to pursue this with Mr. Young, the board can obviously apply reasonable conditions. We could include the credit that's being accounted for and integrate that into superseding declaration, so the capacity is actually memorialized against the title of the property. But the whole reason we're before you is staff do a great job of keeping the files up to date, and then as projects come through, we're always doing a screening for what are all of the regulatory activities that have preceded it on a property. But that's more administrative versus sort of an instrument that's recorded against the real estate.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think the more you can write it down and keep it tracked, then if the property changes hands, no one loses the information. So I like that idea. That's helpful. I mean, from a logical standpoint, the structure that's being built, I get they probably want to be close to the lake for views and whatnot. But obviously, ideally, they would manage their stormwater nearby, right? In protection of the lake. And so I get they have some capacity they can use elsewhere on the site, but I just appreciate it being clearly memorialized that they're utilizing that.
Would you suggest that that would be handled as an exception or an amendment to the exception?
Condition or,
President White, I would look to Lewis, but I think it's within the board's purview to apply reasonable conditions as you're granting a permit. So if you
Okay.
do consider action on the exception and then on the permit, that could be part of the motion to include that as a condition of approval.
Manager Loftus?
yeah, I think that's something,
Any
I
other?
think it's a single site, it's by one owner, they have the right to utilize other parts of their property, even though we might wish it was closer by, they have that capacity, they can certainly utilize it, but if we can document that it's losing some of that capacity because of this. Like if something else comes up in the future, that part is not available anymore. They've utilized that. That would be a
I'll
little
move
bit
that.
comforting to me that, if it does keep getting phased, that's being tracked.
I'll move that amendment.
Well, first we have to deal with the exception before I can go to the permit, but that could be a condition to the permit.
I used to like it a lot better when we decide stuff on politics and friendship, because I hate to vote against Mike, but I guess we gotta go rely on science.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Anything else before we vote on the exception?
One comment.
Manager Olson?
I know that this lake association is very active on this lake. If you look at the 14 lakes that make up the western chain of lakes, this is the A-grade lake. This is the clean one. This is the beginning, the headwaters of our entire watershed. And so the concern of the people, the residents living around the lake is loud in our ears, because this is where it begins. We have spent the last 10 years trying to get the other lakes downstream from this delisted, because so many of them are impaired. So when I go to these county workshops where the Lake Association is present and we have tiles coming off of farmland on the north end of the lake that are directly draining into the lake, and there's a lot of concern on the part of the residents, we're all listening well. In response to that, we have done a lot of testing of the water on that lake, and the lake consistently handles and absorbs and deals with that burden that's coming in from the north. So there are well-established significant threats to this body of water, and that lake is hung in there and is continues to survive in its very high-ranking measurements of quality. So yes, we are listening. Yes, we are sensitive to it, and I am more inclined to understand the loud sound of 10 times what is required by our rules. To me, that is a positive, very positive thing. It's not, does that existing historic cause threaten the lake? It is, I'm building something new and I'm going to take 10 times the effort. And so I have a lot of sympathy toward that attitude, toward that proposal. And so we are concerned about Pearson, and we are not going to be the people sitting here letting something risk that status. But we have this mission to keep that in its healthy state, and we're going to try to do it with that, with these conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Olson. Anything else? All those in favor of granting the exception, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving now to the permit. Would you like to make the motion?
Yeah, I'll move the.
And with the addition of the condition regarding
With the addition,
memorializing?
yeah.
the
You don't need
assignment.
an amendment?
No,
Okay.
I don't think so. We're okay there. Is there a second? Manager Hitchmati seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Permit's approved. Thank you for bringing the concerns forward. Thank you, Ms. Menden, for addressing all of those concerns. We can move now to the next item. Permit 25-117, Ms. Menden and Ms. Baker. And of course, 10.3 and 11.1 are related items.
I wonder if I get started within the next couple minutes. Yes. All right. Good evening, President White and Board of Managers. This evening, we have two items on the agenda regarding the East Auburn Wetland Restoration Project. First, the project permit, and then the project 90% design update. It's board policy to review and approve the permit for district projects for transparency, and District the research and monitoring team worked to identify the loading source of the wetland by comparing the inlet and outlet of the East Auburn Wetland Complex, which was broken into 4 cells. The data revealed an increase in average phosphorus concentration at the outlet of the wetland compared to the inlet, ultimately leading to the conclusion that the wetland complex exports approximately 135 pounds phosphorus to East Auburn each year. Having understood this potential for reduction and restoration, district staff worked to identify if loading was coming from a particular cell or equally across the wetland. Data indicated that the first cell, cell 1, was responsible for the majority of the phosphorus export, likely attributed to legacy nutrients delivered from upstream Wasserman Lake. And cell 1 is now the site of the current project. Feasibility, constructed in 2023, identified hydrologic restoration of the wetland through the installation of an outlet control structure, or sheet pile weir, as the most cost-effective and feasible opportunity to reduce nutrient export. In addition to the weir, the City of Victoria has asked MCWD to advance design for a new boardwalk to replace the existing failing boardwalk that crosses the wetland near the proposed site of the weir. And I'll briefly review the weir and its updates from 60% design. So when I was in front of you at the end of February, we had 60% design plan sheets. And this shows that the weir had a single level height across the length of the weir at an elevation of 943.9 and spanned across the entire wetland channel. The 2, 10, and 100-year events all flow over the entire width of the weir. Additional modeling since then has revealed that we were able to add back in a notch to the weir, which allows us to hold back more water behind it, improving potential nutrient reduction estimates. The low flow opening remains at 943.9, which is the elevation of the ordinary high water line. The rest of the weir will be at 946 elevation, so about 2 feet higher than the low flow opening. This is all while still making sure that there are no water level impacts to the surrounding lakes, Wasserman, Carl Cray, and East Auburn Lake. I also want to point out that these images have an exaggerated vertical scale, so imagine this stretched a lot more horizontally. So you'll see it's much less protruding from the wetland than as this is portrayed. Once the wetland is placed, a permanent pool of about 6 to 12 inches will inundate the wetland during normal years. The pool will stay within the Cell 1 wetland boundary, which is entirely on land owned by the City of Victoria. It's important to note that the permanent pool doesn't exactly mean we'll see all of this open water. It's very shallow, and the emergent wetland vegetation in this wetland will be taller and will continue to persist even with this permanent pool. By maintaining saturated conditions in Cell 1, we hope to reduce the nutrient export out of the cell by preventing any leaching of phosphorus-rich groundwater and mobilization of phosphorus during rain events. This work will also restore the degraded wetland by re-engineering the hydrology to replicate its natural wetland function before it was ditched. Moving on to the boardwalk, there's no change between 60% and 90% design. The boardwalk will have will be 8 feet wide with a tow curb on the edge for safety. The lowest point of the boardwalk is 948 feet, 2 feet higher than the highest point of the weir. The boardwalk will be able to accommodate city snow removal equipment and meets MnDOT and ADA standards, which means no gradient change higher than 4%. And city and nearby residents support the refurbishment of this boardwalk. Speaking of residents, we hosted a public meeting at Victoria City Hall on Tuesday, March 25th. 15 residents attended, 3 of our board managers, and the city engineer, Kara Guerin, was also present. The open house style meeting provided information on the restoration project and gathered feedback from interested residents. There was overall project support and a level of excitement for both the trail improvements and improvements to the water quality. Another mandatory project element is permitting. We've applied for the applicable permits with DNR and the Army Corps, and we have already received word that we've obtained the Army Corps permit. And I'll now hand it over to Maggie, who will introduce the district permit for this project.
Thank you.
All right, so item 10.3 is for the East Auburn Wetland District permit. This project triggers the district's floodplain alteration, water body crossings and structures, and wetland protection rules. Staff and the district engineer have reviewed the proposal and confirmed that it meets these requirements. I'll briefly run through each rule before recommending approval of this permit. Floodplain alteration is triggered due to portions of the weir and boardwalk being within the wetlands floodplain. The removal of the existing boardwalk timbers provides approximately 0.56 cubic yards of floodplain storage. The proposed weir and new piers will occupy about 0.37 cubic yards, resulting in a net gain of 0.19 cubic yards. This meets the requirement of no net loss of flood storage. The water body crossings and structures rule is triggered as the weir and boardwalk are being placed within a water body. The boardwalk and weir meet the requirements as they serve a public purpose, do not impact existing navigation or wildlife passage, and do not promote erosion or scour. As Rachel explained, a major component of this project is to hold water back, which inherently changes the hydraulic capacity of the wetland. So under Section 4A of this rule, the board may waive a requirement of this rule, such as maintaining hydraulic capacity, if they find that the water body has been altered, is degraded, and that the proposal would provide ecological restoration. The wetland and channel have been altered over time and therefore don't function as well as they once did. The proposed weir will re-engineer its hydrology to mimic those natural conditions by promoting nutrient uptake and sediment settling, which will improve water quality downstream. Staff and the district engineer have reviewed the proposal against the waiver criteria and request that the board approve the waiver under the water body crossings and structures rule. Due to the last rule being triggered, a wetland buffer is required here. Those of you who have been on site know that the city's property around the wetland is already densely vegetated, aside from a trail that runs along both sides. The project meets these requirements as the required buffer area is already well established to the greatest amount feasible within the city's property. Staff and the district engineer have reviewed the proposal and recommend that the board approve. I'll turn it back to President White for consideration of this permit.
Thank you, Ms. Mendon. First, is there a motion to
So
approve the
moved.
permit? Thank you, Manager Olson. Is there a second?
Okay.
I'll take a second from Manager Sando. Questions? Mr. Manager Olson?
The wetland itself, when we saw the blue outline of what it would look like when water is present, is the vegetation in that wetland desirable? Is that what the type of vegetation we want? Or does that area have undesirable vegetation that we should treat or get rid of or restore?
Manager Olson, it has a mix. It has pockets of good vegetation, has some pockets of kind of typical canary reed grass and cattails that, maybe aren't desirable when they're take over the entire wetland, but there are pockets of good and bad, I would say.
Okay, but it's not so bad that we need to go in there and do something with that right now?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. It may be a future project. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Manager Loftus?
It's more a comment, but I just appreciate staff, going through the full process on this. It's awkward to give yourself a permit, but I think the best we can do is, bring it to a public meeting and welcome any comments the public might have. And obviously, we feel our project is going to give significant public benefit, but we're open to questions or challenges of that as well. So thank you for going through the process and not just issuing it without airing it to the public. We appreciate that. But we'll still awkwardly approve our own project.
Anything else? Manager Olson?
Real quick for legal, how common is this
It's common.
awkwardness that she
Yeah,
brought up?
you do.
Madam President, it's not at all uncommon for agencies to self-permit their own projects, to apply their own rules as they would to any other.
Okay.
Who else are we
You're
going to
gonna have
ask?
to do it. I mean, it's just,
Well, no, I understand.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure you didn't have to feel bad about it.
I don't think
Well, I feel
so.
bad
I think
about
if you issued it and didn't bring it forward how you would others, you would
Right. Thank
feel
you.
bad about it, but this is
Yeah.
the right way.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Anything else before we vote? Those in favor of granting the permit, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Now we can move on to 11.1.
Right, 11.1, where staff is requesting board approval of 90% design and authorization to solicit bids for the East Auburn Wetland Restoration Project. So we've already covered the site background and project elements and completed the permit evaluation. So now I'll walk through project cost, estimates, the city agreements, and next steps. The engineer's opinion of probable cost estimate is in the table here, broken up by project element, which lines up with payer responsibility. The district is paying for the weir, and the cost estimate is about $336,855, which sits right in the middle of the feasibility range, which was $240,000 to $390,000. The boardwalk, which we'll be setting up as a bid alternate, is being funded by the city and has a cost estimate of $227,830. In total, $685,000, along with the construction oversight. In your packet is the term sheet outlining the elements of what will be further refined into a final agreement with the City of Victoria and the Board of Managers to consider and approve. The agreement covers all aspects for partners to advance the project, but there are three main components that I will walk you through. The first is access. The agreement will establish the district a right of access by means of an easement. The easement will accommodate access and staging for construction, as well as operation and maintenance. Second is maintenance. The agreement will specify that the city will own and maintain the weir, and the district will own, the city will own and maintain the boardwalk, and the district will own and maintain the weir. The O&M manual, which you can find in the board packet, goes into further detail on how and how often each element will be inspected and maintained. The third component of the agreement will be the repayment structure. The district will fund construction of the boardwalk refurbishment up front, and then the city will engage in a repayment plan where 20% of the cost will be due upon final invoice of construction, and then equal annual payments thereafter for the next 4 years. If there are no major changes to these terms, and if there are no reservations from you regarding the terms of the agreement, then once the city signs and approves the agreement, we will plan to add it as a consent item at a future board meeting, likely in May or June. But if there are any substantive changes to the terms, I'll bring it back before the board to discuss and approve. So the next steps after tonight's board meeting, anticipating board approval of the forthcoming resolution, will be to finalize the bid package, which will happen in the next few weeks to get it to 100% design. Sometime in May or June, the city agreement will be signed by both parties before the bid period begins. We're estimating the bid period to begin July 7th, but this time is flexible based on what our consultant and contractors view as a favorable bid window for winter construction. Assuming a bid period in July, we anticipate coming to the August 14th board meeting to award the bid, and then the next few weeks thereafter will be spent contracting, obtaining construction bonds, and then issuing a notice to proceed so that the contractor can order materials and make any needed preparations for construction. Work will happen during frozen conditions, so the anticipated start time will be sometime between December and February, but will be ultimately dictated by the weather. Substantial completion of the construction, which includes everything except final seeding, shrub planting, and trail patching, will be completed by February 27th, 2026. And with that, staff is presenting Resolution 25-024 to the board, which seeks approval of the 90% design plans for the East Auburn Wetland Restoration Project and authorization to solicit bids.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
I'll move that we adopt Resolution 25024.
Thank you, Manager Olson. Is there a second? Manager Hejmati seconds. Any questions or discussion? Manager Olson?
Just a quick comment on all of these issues out where Carver County is. I really appreciate the work you folks have put into it. Sometimes it can be a tough decision, and you, again, keep finding a way to make everything happen. So I deeply appreciate the work. Thank you.
And even though I'm from Hennepin County, I appreciate the work you're doing in Carver County, too. Manager Maxwell and I were having a side conversation about how those tow boards, or whatever you call them on the side, tow rail, is a safety improvement over the existing boardwalk, which is a good thing. Anything else?
The first is the vegetation. The permanent pool should favor the native more than the exotics, like the Reed Canary, as well as if there's a permanent pool, but it would be something that we can sort of wait and see. I mean, there are as out there now or by staff and your consultants. So monitor it and then see how it improves and possibly. Other thing I wanted to mention in regard to manager comment. If anything, I would say that I'm confident that your staff and administrators are more stringent on your projects.
Sure.
Then, well, just for example, there was an exemption request before the board tonight on another project that had merit, and the board approved. In this case, worked very extensively to ensure that we did not need to request an exception of any kind. That was directly at the direction of Mr. Whisker, wanting to ensure that the board and staff hold themselves as a higher standard than even allow projects within. So, other consultants, we work for a lot of different, say that whole that your team hold yourself to as high of a standard as any other municipalities or water.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Are there any board inquiries, issues, or ideas to bring forth this evening? And Mr. Whisker, your report.
Yes, thank you, President White. Let's see, I've got 3 or 4 items to report on this evening. At the
I
top,
thought you were going to say 3 or 4 pages.
yeah. I write
Which would be
big and
okay if
messy.
that's what you had.
So the first thing that I want to keep the board apprised of is ongoing communications that we have had with JTS. As a quick reminder, that's our contractor for the Preserve Boardwalk. We've been on a little bit of an odyssey working through defective work. We received a response from the boardwalk contractor via their attorney, Mark Kemper, just last week. That came in response to the Watershed District about 5 weeks ago drafting a change order which would integrate the alternatives that the contractors requested. These joist extension brackets, metal shims, and a few other specifics into the actual contract documents, which the city has stated is a prerequisite to approving them as alternatives to building code. So we've worked through a long process to go through those submittals, the engineering, the field test, and then the change order is this final step before the city would approve those and allow those to be implemented. The response came along with a draft implementation plan, which is something that we'd requested. That isn't necessarily complete, so we're going to be asking that JTS continue to pencil out exactly, logistically, how they're going to move through the boardwalk, source the material, work through the jacking to our satisfaction. What I wanted to highlight in the letter that we received is the contractors requested the payment that is outstanding under the contract and that's been withheld, or a reason for why it's been withheld, which we can handle. And they've also outlined that they're willing to repair the defects according to the implementation plan for payment of an additional amount. So we're currently analyzing that with legal, and we're going to be preparing a very simple response, encouraging the contractor to focus on their incomplete implementation plan. And then we will have this letter and the matter back in front of the board at a subsequent meeting for discussion. But I just wanted to let you know where things were and how things are progressing.
Thank you.
Continuing the annual tradition, outreach staff are prepping for the Citizens Advisory Committee and Board annual field trip. So you're going to see a schedule pull for that forthcoming next week. I think it's likely to be scheduled sometime in May, when spring officially arrives. And we're going to be targeting Minneapolis as a location so that we can get our eyes on some of the project areas that are part of the Parkway Master Plan, and maybe an optional finish over by the falls and Sea Salt Cafe. It's been a while since we've been east with the tours, so that's on the docket, and you'll see that coming. I got a note from Minnesota Watersheds that the Attorney General, Keith Ellison's assembling a task force for the future of Minnesota water. It kind of piqued my interest. The emphasis is on stewardship through imagination, not only regulation, and they're seeking applications. So that's something that I put a feeler out to our government relations friend, Joel Carlson, and I'm interested in applying. So just wanted to get that on the board's radar. If you thought that was a bad idea or a good idea, I can share more information. The deadline isn't for another couple of weeks, but.
Well, I think it's a great idea because, you know, if we're not leading the activity, or, you know, I don't know who would be more qualified than our participants.
Sounds good.
Great. Yeah, they're seeking a cross-section of folks that represent agricultural watersheds, academia, water quality experts, folks that have experts in partnership, and I think that we fit a number of those. I might have mentioned this during the last administrator's report, but maybe it bears repeating. The Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership, which is a faction of the University of Minnesota, recently awarded the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District a partnership award for its work with the National Weather Service, with NOAA, and Hennepin County, which integrates forecasts and then the measurement of weather, principally rainfall, and then our co-measurement with Hennepin County of water levels. So Brian's build out of, and Kaylee's and the research and monitoring teams, ResNet. That work obviously informs dam operations. It supports communications with emergency managers. The award ceremony is set at the Bell Museum for May 8th. Unfortunately, it's a board meeting night, so we're going to be sending, I think, Becky and Brian, because on May 8th in committee we'll be kicking off the budget for 2026, and I wouldn't want to miss that. And I think the award is really good timing because we, as you all know, are working on drafting our flood response plan, and that plan really outlines how we're using that data-driven approach, both to operate the dam, but to communicate directly and provide portals into that data for emergency managers so they can be responsive to local community needs. We are planning this spring, sometime in second or third week in May, to engage our external partners, Hennepin, Carver County, the park districts, and municipalities in a mini summit where we would showcase ResNet, the lines of service that we provide during, before and leading up to and during flooding, where we'd clarify our role, the roles of cities, and the roles that residents themselves have to play in preparing for and adapting to flood risk. And we'll be convening that summit directly with the Director of Hennepin County Emergency Management and our friends at National Weather Service. And we'll give a peek into water level forecasts for the season, and then we'll go through the purpose of our plan. We'll showcase ResNet. We'll get some feedback on our plan, and we'll use that to crystallize and clarify roles with our external partners. So the timing of this award will be good content fodder for that summit. And that is what I have for the administrator's report, unless there's questions.
I got a board inquiry issue, an idea. At the Mill Falls at in Edina, they've got some storyboards that are just look like hell. I don't think they're ours, I think they're the city's, but it seems to me that we should visit with the city about doing a joint storyboard with the quality like we've got in the, what's the lake?
Wasserman?
Wasserman,
Wasserman.
yep,
Uh,
good idea.
because they're all water marked and fading out, and it looks pretty crummy. And but it's mostly about the mill, which is important. But we should have something shown, the whole watershed layout, and how far it goes, and what major lakes are in it, and whatever you decide, like something like you got on the Minnehaha Greenway, but more of this new style with the cutout metal.
Yep.
That really looks permanent and it really looks fresh.
Excellent.
Put that on the list.
Thank you, Manager Miller.
Do you know how many interest letters we've received for Land and Water Partnership?
How many interest letters?
Yeah.
I don't, not off the
Okay.
top of my head.
No worries.
But we can report out on that. The Land and Water Partnership and the Capital Improvement Plan will both be reporting out to the board, but also the Citizens Advisory Committee in May. So we'll kind of dig up what level of interest we've got and inquiries, and we'll assemble that data for the board and the CAC.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Whisker? Then we will move to item 12.1. Mr. Haven.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Managers. I am before you this evening for discussion regarding 325 Blake Road. It has to do with conversations and activities that have occurred since the last board meeting where we issued a notice of termination, and as such would suggest that legal counsel lead the board into closed session to continue those discussions.
All right. Staff who are not directly involved are free to go. Thank you very much, everyone. I'll wait until the room's empty.
Thank you.
One question.
Thank you.
One agency charge the other agency interest. We're doing with Victoria, they're going to pay us back.
Well, there's an interest involved. Richfield.
No, I mean, it was
Ask James later, maybe.
James. Does one agency charge the other agency interest? Like in the boardwalk. Didn't want to ask. Okay. Not, they just pay back over time with no interest.
That's the way that we've structured.
All right.
Mr. Smith, would you state the reason for a closed session?
Madam President, we'd recommend a motion that the board go into closed session for the purpose of considering the cancellation and potential terms for the purchase and sale agreement for 325 Blake Road in Hopkins.
So
Thank-
moved.
I have a motion from Manager Olson. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Maxwell seconds. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion to go into open session. Manager Olson, is there a second? Manager Hijmati, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting adjourned.